Here's a sermon-style intro and structure, written in the reflective, compassionate tone often associated with Dr. Gabor Mate, gentle, honest, and unsettling in the right way. There is a quiet question many people carry, but rarely speak out loud. It doesn't scream. It doesn't demand attention. It simply waits in the background of busy lives, full schedules, scrolling thumbs, and polite smiles. Why do I feel empty inside? Not sad enough to cry, not broken enough to collapse, just hollow, disconnected. As if something essential went missing, and no amount of achievement, pleasure, or distraction seems able to fill the space. This emptiness is not a personal failure. It is not a lack of gratitude. It is not a weakness of character. It is a message. And like all meaningful messages from within, it asks not to be silenced, but to be listened to. We live in a culture that teaches us to override inner signals, to normalize numbness, to call survival success, and to mistake functioning for wholeness. So when the emptiness appears, we rush to fix it, medicate it, distract from it, or shame ourselves for feeling it at all. But what if this emptiness is not the problem? What if it is evidence of something deeply intelligent inside you? Something that knows you were meant to feel more than this, to live more truthfully than this, to be more than a role you learned to play. The question is not why you feel empty, but what you had to give up in order to survive, and what it might mean to gently, compassionately, begin to come back to yourself. Keynotes. 1. Emptiness is the cost of self-abandonment, not a personal flaw. 2. Disconnection begins as a childhood adaptation, not a conscious choice. 3. Numbness is a protective response, not the absence of feeling. 4. Modern culture rewards performance over presence. 5. Awareness restores aliveness before it changes behavior. Keynote No. 1 expanded. The emptiness you feel inside did not appear out of nowhere, and it did not arise because there is something wrong with you. It emerged gradually, quietly, as a cost you paid for staying connected to the world around you. As children, we are wired for attachment. Connection is not a luxury, it is survival. When the environment around us cannot meet our emotional needs consistently, when our feelings are misunderstood, dismissed, or overwhelming for the adults we depend on, we face an impossible choice. We cannot leave. We cannot fight. So we adapt. And the adaptation often takes the form of leaving ourselves. This is not a dramatic decision. It happens subtly. You learn which emotions are welcome and which are inconvenient. You discover which parts of you receive love and which create distance. Slowly, intelligently, your nervous system makes adjustments. It prioritizes belonging over authenticity, safety over truth, acceptance over aliveness. This is not weakness. It is wisdom at a very young age. But every adaptation has a cost. When you consistently ignore your own signals, suppress your needs, or override your inner experience to maintain connection, something vital gets muted. The body remembers what the mind forgets. The emptiness you feel later in life is often the echo of this early self-abandonment. It is the absence of your own presence in your life. You may be productive, admired, responsible, even successful, yet feel strangely detached from joy, from meaning, from yourself. This happens because the same mechanism that once protected you from emotional pain now limits your capacity for emotional richness. You cannot selectively numb. When you turn down pain, you also turn down pleasure, curiosity, and vitality. Many people judge themselves harshly for this emptiness. They tell themselves they should be happier, more motivated, more grateful. But shame only deepens the disconnection. The truth is that emptiness is not laziness or ingratitude. It is the result of a nervous system that learned early on that being fully present was not safe. Over time, this becomes normal. You stop noticing what you feel because you stopped expecting it to matter. Life becomes something you manage rather than inhabit. Relationships become roles. Goals become distractions. And the inner world becomes quiet, not peaceful, but absent. What begins to heal this emptiness is not forcing yourself to feel more or pushing yourself to be different. Healing starts with understanding, with compassion, with recognizing that who you became was not a mistake, but a survival strategy. When you see that your emptiness once served a purpose, self-judgment softens. Curiosity replaces blame. You begin to notice the moments when you disconnect, when you override yourself, when you say yes while your body says no, not to correct them immediately, but to witness them. Awareness is not passive. It is restorative. Each moment of honest noticing is a small act of returning. You don't fill emptiness by adding more to your life. You fill it by reclaiming the parts of yourself that learned they had to disappear in order to be loved, by allowing yourself to feel safely, slowly, without pressure, without performance, without the demand to be fixed. Letting presence come back online, one breath, one sensation, one honest moment at a time. As the space inside you begins to feel less like a void and more like a doorway back to the self that was never broken, only hidden, waiting for permission to emerge again, disconnection does not begin as rebellion or indifference. It begins as intelligence. As a child, you do not have the luxury of asking whether your environment is healthy or whether the people caring for you are emotionally available. You cannot analyze dynamics or advocate for your needs. Your nervous system's only job is to keep you attached, because attachment is survival. So when the emotional climate around you is unpredictable, overwhelming, dismissive, or unsafe, your system makes adjustments long before you have language for them. You learn how to stay close by staying quiet. You learn how to be lovable by being agreeable. You learn how to avoid pain by not feeling too much. None of this is conscious. It is automatic, embodied, and deeply adaptive. A child who is met with irritation when they express sadness does not decide to disconnect from their emotions. Their body learns that sadness threatens connection. A child who is praised for being strong, mature, or self-sufficient does not choose independence over intimacy. They learn that needing too much creates distance. A child who grows up in chaos does not decide to numb out. Their nervous system dampens sensation because constant alertness is exhausting. In each case, disconnection is not pathology. It is protection. It is the nervous system saying, "This is how we survive here." The tragedy is not that these adaptations happen. The tragedy is that we carry them forward into environments where they are no longer necessary. The body does not update automatically. What once kept you safe now keeps you distant. You may no longer be in danger of rejection, but your system still anticipates it. You may be surrounded by opportunity for connection, yet feel unable to receive it. You may crave intimacy, but feel uncomfortable when it actually appears. This is because the patterns of disconnection were learned before choice was possible, before awareness existed, before the self had the power to say, I want something different. This is why telling people to just open up or be more present often fails. You cannot will yourself out of a protective response that once ensured your survival. Disconnection lives in the body, not just in thought. It shows up as tightness, as numbness, as distraction, as overthinking, as business. It shows up as the inability to sit still with yourself without reaching for stimulation. It shows up as feeling unreal in your own life. And because these patterns form so early, they feel like personality rather than history. You say, this is just how I am, without realizing that who you are includes a self that learned to disappear when it was not safe to be fully seen. There is often grief hidden beneath this realization. Grief for the child who had to adapt instead of being met. Grief for the emotions that were never fully welcomed. Grief for the aliveness that was postponed. Many people avoid this grief by staying disconnected because feeling it threatens to overwhelm. But grief is not the enemy. It is evidence that something mattered. And disconnection, when understood with compassion, becomes a doorway rather than a dead end. Healing does not mean blaming parents or rewriting the past. It means understanding the logic of your adaptations. It means recognizing that your emptiness, your numbness, your sense of distance from yourself did not arise because you failed to choose connection, but because connection once required self-erasure. When you see this clearly, shame begins to loosen its grip. You stop asking, what is wrong with me? And start asking, what happened to me that made this necessary? From this place, choice slowly becomes possible. Not dramatic choice, not overnight transformation, but gentle, embodied moments of reconnection. You notice when you tense. You notice when you override your own needs. You notice when distraction takes over. And instead of forcing yourself to change, you stay curious. You stay present. You allow sensation without rushing to escape it. The body learns through experience, not instruction, that the present moment is safer than the past. That feeling does not automatically lead to abandonment. That presence does not equal danger. Disconnection was never a moral failing. It was a brilliant solution to an impossible situation. And what was learned in protection can be unlearned in safety, not through pressure, but through patience. Not through self-improvement, but through self-relationship, as the nervous system gradually releases the need to disappear, and the self that adapted so wisely begins carefully to come back into the room. Numbness is often misunderstood as emptiness, as if nothing is happening inside you, as if you have lost the capacity to feel. But numbness is not the absence of feeling. It is the presence of too much feeling at a time when feeling was not safe. It is what happens when the nervous system decides that sensation, emotion, and vulnerability are overwhelming and must be turned down to survive. This response is not a failure of sensitivity. It is the result of sensitivity meeting an environment that could not hold it. When a child feels fear, sadness, anger, or longing, and those feelings are met with dismissal, punishment, ridicule, or emotional unavailability, the body learns a powerful lesson. Feeling creates danger. Expression threatens connection. So the system adapts by dulling the volume. Not completely, but enough to get through the day. This is not a conscious decision. The child does not think, "I will stop feeling now." The body simply does what it must to reduce pain. Over time, this protective dampening becomes familiar. It becomes normal. It becomes what you call your personality. Calm, rational, unbothered, strong. But underneath that calm often lies a frozen intensity, a depth of emotion that never found a safe place to move. Numbness is not empty space. It is compressed experience. It is emotion held back, waiting. This is why numbness can feel heavy rather than light, flat rather than peaceful. People often say, "I don't feel anything," but their bodies tell a different story. Tight jaws, shallow breathing, restlessness, fatigue, compulsive distraction. The system is working very hard to keep awareness away from something that once felt unbearable. If there were truly nothing there, it would not require so much effort to keep it contained. This is also why numbness often coexists with sudden waves of anxiety, irritability, or sadness that seem to come out of nowhere. The protective wall is not perfect. It leaks. And when it does, the emotions that surface feel confusing and disproportionate, because they are not just about the present moment. They carry the weight of the past. The body remembers what the mind learned to forget. Numbness is not the absence of memory. It is memory without narrative, emotion without context, sensation without permission. Many people try to escape numbness by forcing themselves to feel. They seek intensity, stimulation, drama, substances, or constant activity, hoping something will break through. Others judge themselves harshly, believing they are broken, cold, or incapable of love or joy. But pressure only strengthens the defense. You cannot bully a nervous system into safety. Numbness dissolves not through force, but through trust. And trust is built slowly, through repeated experiences of being present without being overwhelmed. The first step in working with numbness is understanding its purpose. It kept you functioning when feeling too much would have cost you connection. It allowed you to stay attached, to stay acceptable, to stay alive in an environment that required emotional restraint. When you recognize numbness as protection rather than pathology, shame begins to loosen. You stop asking why you're like this and start acknowledging how intelligent your system had to be. Compassion becomes possible. And compassion is not a soft indulgence. It is a biological signal of safety. As safety increases, feeling returns not all at once, but in fragments. A subtle warmth, a moment of sadness without collapse, a tear that surprises you, a sense of longing you didn't know was still there. This can be frightening because numbness once felt like control. Feeling can seem like chaos, but emotions, when allowed to move, are not dangerous. They are transient. They rise, peak, and fall. It was their suppression, not their presence, that created the sense of being stuck. Numbness is the nervous system saying, "It was too much back then." Healing is the body discovering, through lived experience, that it is not too much now, that you can feel and remain intact, that emotion does not automatically lead to abandonment, that presence does not mean punishment. This learning does not happen through insight alone. It happens through gentle attention to sensation, through relationships that allow honesty without consequence, through moments where you notice what you feel and choose not to run from it, even briefly. You do not become alive by tearing down numbness. You become alive by listening to it, by asking what it protected you from, by honoring the intelligence that created it. When numbness is met with patience rather than urgency, with curiosity rather than judgment, it slowly releases its grip. Not because it was wrong, but because it is no longer needed. And the feelings it once guarded can begin to move again, not as a flood, but as a quiet return of sensation, meaning, and inner life that was never lost, only held in reserve, waiting for safety to arrive. Modern culture does not ask who you are when you are alone with yourself. It asks what you can produce, how fast you can respond, how well you can present, and how convincingly you can perform a version of yourself that fits the moment. From a very young age, we are trained to equate worth with output. Grades, likes, productivity, appearance, status, hustle. We learn quickly that being busy is praised, being efficient is admired, and being emotionally available to ourselves is often seen as indulgent or weak. Presence does not show up on a resume. Stillness does not generate metrics. And so we learn, quietly, to abandon the present moment in order to remain valuable. Performance is rewarded because it is visible. Presence is not. You can measure achievements. You can quantify success. You can rank people. But you cannot easily measure inner contact, emotional truth, or embodied awareness. These things do not scale well. They do not serve markets or algorithms. So culture subtly teaches us to live from the neck up, to prioritize thinking over feeling, doing over being, appearance over authenticity. We become very good at managing impressions and very disconnected from experience. We know how to function, but we do not know how to inhabit our lives. This is especially powerful for people who learned early that love was conditional. If attention, approval, or safety depended on being useful, impressive, agreeable, or strong, then modern culture feels familiar. It reinforces old adaptations. The more you perform, the more you are rewarded. The more you disconnect from your body, your needs, your limits, the more efficient you become. Exhaustion is normalized. Burnout is worn like a badge of honor. Rest is postponed until some imaginary future where everything is finally done. And in the meantime, the present moment is treated as an obstacle to overcome rather than a place to live. Presence, by contrast, asks something culture rarely encourages. It asks you to slow down without justification, to notice sensation without immediately labeling it, to feel emotions without turning them into content or productivity. Presence reveals what performance hides: fatigue, grief, longing, fear, and unmet needs. And because these experiences cannot be optimized or monetized easily, they are often dismissed. We are told to manage stress rather than understand it, to cope rather than to listen, to push through rather than to pause. The message is subtle but constant. Your inner life is less important than your external output. Technology amplifies this dynamic. Constant stimulation fragments attention and trains the nervous system to stay in anticipation mode. Notifications, feeds, deadlines, comparisons. There is always something pulling you away from the present moment. Silence feels uncomfortable, not because it is empty, but because it is unfamiliar. When the noise stops, the body has a chance to speak. And many people are afraid of what they might hear, so they stay busy. Not because they love the pace, but because slowing down feels unsafe. The cost of a performance-based life is not immediately obvious. You can succeed while being disconnected. You can achieve while feeling empty. You can be admired while feeling unseen. But over time, the body keeps the score. Anxiety, depression, chronic stress, unexplained fatigue, a sense of unreality. These are not personal failures. They are signals that a human nervous system is being asked to live like a machine. That presence has been sacrificed for performance for too long. Reclaiming presence in such a culture is not an act of rebellion so much as an act of remembering. Remembering that your worth was never meant to be earned through constant output. Remembering that being alive is not the same as being productive. Presence does not mean withdrawing from the world. It means bringing yourself into it. It means noticing when you are rushing without necessity, when you are saying yes while your body says no, when you are doing for approval rather than from alignment. Presence begins in small, almost invisible ways. A breath you actually feel, a pause before responding, a moment of honesty with yourself that you do not share online. These moments will not be rewarded by culture. They may even be discouraged, but they are rewarded by the body, by a nervous system that begins to feel less driven and more grounded, by an inner life that starts to regain texture and meaning. Modern culture may reward performance, but the human system still needs presence. And the emptiness many people feel is not because they are doing too little, but because they have been doing too much without being there for it. When presence slowly returns, not as a productivity tool, but as a way of inhabiting your own life, the sense of hollowness begins to soften. And what replaces it is not constant happiness, but something far more sustaining, a felt sense of being real, here, and allowed to exist without performing for permission. Awareness is often misunderstood as a tool for self-improvement, as if its primary purpose were to fix behavior, correct habits, or produce better outcomes. But awareness does something far more fundamental before it ever changes what you do. It brings you back into contact with yourself. Aliveness does not return because you force different choices. It returns because you are finally present for your own experience. Before any behavior shifts, something inside you wakes up. Most of our behaviors are not choices in the way we imagine. They are conditioned responses, shaped by years of adaptation, protection, and repetition. We reach for distraction before we feel lonely. We stay busy before we feel tired. We please before we feel angry. These patterns operate automatically, below conscious thought. Trying to change them through willpower often fails because willpower addresses the surface while the roots remain untouched. Awareness, by contrast, goes underneath. It does not ask, how do I stop this? It asks, what is happening in me right now? When awareness is present, even briefly, the nervous system shifts. You notice your breath instead of holding it. You feel the tension in your chest instead of ignoring it. You sense the urge to escape before you act on it. Nothing dramatic has changed externally, but internally something important has happened. You are no longer absent. You are with yourself, and that contact alone begins to restore aliveness. Sensation returns. Emotion becomes accessible. The body starts to feel like a place you live in rather than a vehicle you drive. This is why awareness can feel uncomfortable at first. Aliveness includes discomfort. It includes sadness, fear, and grief that were once numbed for survival. Many people mistake this initial discomfort for failure and rush back to old coping strategies. But feeling more is not the same as suffering more. Suffering often comes from resistance, from not wanting what is already here. Awareness does not create pain. It reveals what was already present but unacknowledged. And what is acknowledged can move. What is avoided remains stuck. Behavior change that comes before awareness is often brittle. It relies on pressure, discipline, and constant monitoring. Behavior change that follows awareness is organic. When you truly feel the cost of disconnection in your body, not as a concept, but as a lived experience, you no longer need to force yourself to choose differently. The different choice begins to feel more natural. You rest because you can feel exhaustion. You speak honestly because you can feel the tension of silence. You set boundaries because you can feel the impact of overextension. Aliveness guides behavior more reliably than rules ever could. Awareness also softens self-judgment. When you see your patterns clearly, without labeling them as good or bad, they lose some of their grip. Shame thrives in the dark. It tells you that your struggles are personal defects. Awareness brings light without blame. You begin to see that your reactions make sense in the context of your history, that your habits were once solutions. This understanding does not excuse harm, but it creates the conditions for change. You are far more likely to shift what you understand than what you despise. Aliveness returning through awareness does not mean constant intensity or emotional openness. It means responsiveness. It means being able to feel subtle shifts inside you and respond with care rather than compulsion. It means having access to your inner signals again. Many people have spent years living in a muted state, functioning but not fully inhabiting their lives. When awareness comes online, there is often a quiet surprise. Colors seem brighter. Moments feel more textured. Time slows just enough to be lived, rather than endured. Only after this reconnection does behavior begin to change in a lasting way. Not because you decided to be different, but because you are different. You are more present, more attuned, more alive. And behavior that no longer serves your well-being starts to feel incongruent rather than tempting. The change is not forced. It is revealed. Awareness is not the end goal. It is the doorway. It restores the felt sense of being here, in this body, in this moment. From that place, choices arise naturally, guided not by fear or habit, but by a renewed relationship with yourself, where aliveness comes first, and behavior follows as a consequence, rather than a command.